Well, it turns out the New York Mets lost to the World Series champs as the Dodgers beat the Yankees in Game 5 to win their 8th title in franchise history. On the show today, we'll talk a little bit about the World Series, but we're also going to focus in on the offseason. What are the big questions that lie ahead for the New York Mets? We'll go through them all on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Down the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Well, if the New York Mets couldn't win the World Series, at least you know you lost to the team that ultimately won it all. The Los Angeles Dodgers are World Series champions. They just proved to be inevitable this postseason. The team that entered the year as the clear favorites to win it all ended up becoming the best version of themselves when it mattered the most. When October began and we saw all the teams lined up, the Dodgers were obviously one of the favorites, but it was not a clear-cut super team that was garnered as the team that absolutely was going to win it all. A lot of people picked the Padres to beat them in the NLDS. The Padres had the best record in baseball from July through the end of the season. They had a bullpen that just got stocked up at the deadline that was just as good as the Dodgers bullpen. They had the edge when it came to starting pitchers with Michael King, Dylan Cease, and Yu Darvish. And they actually pushed the Dodgers to elimination in Game 4. The Dodgers had to stare down elimination with the bullpen game. They won that game in the LDS. They shut them out in both Game 4 and Game 5 with Yoshinobu Yamamoto getting the start in that final game, which put them up against our New York Mets in the NLCS. Mets were the best team in baseball from June to the end of the regular season, had dramatic victories over the Braves to clinch a playoff spot, over the Brewers to clinch the NLDS, over the Phillies at home to clinch the NLCS. There was ever a team of destiny, it felt like the New York Mets, but what we all learned when we watched the Mets go head-to-head with the Dodgers is that team was just too good. Yankees were the last boss for them, and they really had no problems with the Yankees. They lost Game 4, and it was a very similar loss to what we saw when the Mets beat the Dodgers in those couple of games. I think the only difference was the Yankees sort of turned it into a blowout late for the Mets in their 2 victories over the Dodgers. It was early routes where they scored a bunch of runs and then just kept adding on. And Dave Roberts really showed himself to be one of the best managers of baseball, a guy that has done this time and again as far as getting those playoff opportunities, has often been criticized for his management in October. No way you can poke holes in what he did this time. He was brilliant throughout this entire playoff run for the Dodgers, and he really mastered that strategy of giving up a battle to win the war. Saw it against the Mets. It's not to take anything away from the Mets, but when they would get an early lead and it seemed like it was going to be a tough uphill battle for the Dodgers to get back into those games, he threw out there the B, C, or D relievers. And we saw that in Game 4 of the World Series. Once Brent Honeywell went out there in a close game late, you sort of knew, all right, the Dodgers are playing for Game 5. They want to keep their top relievers rested to be able to win that game. And it was a thrilling Game 5. If you didn't watch it tonight, you missed out on what was a really good game. Yankees go up early. Aaron Judge with the 2-run homer. Jazz Chisholm makes it back-to-back in that first inning. So the Yankees are up 3-0. They tack on a run in the second and in the third. Jack Flaherty, very similar to his start against the Mets in Game 5 of the NLCS, he did not have it. And instead of leaving him out there like the Dodgers did against the Mets, because at the time they had to use their bullpen heavily, their top relievers against the Mets to win Game 4, they had those guys rested. So Dave Roberts went to them early, did not risk leaving Flaherty out there to give up 8 runs like he did to the Mets. And the Dodgers relievers sort of stopped the bleeding, and the Yankees just blew it. I mean, it's hard not to enjoy that a little bit, right? If you are a Mets fan and all you have to root for at this point is seeing the Yankees lose, to see them lose that way, pretty rough, pretty rough. For those of you who didn't watch, Aaron Judge drops a routine fly ball. This was after Kike Hernandez had led off the fifth inning with a base hit. Then there was a ground ball in the hole that Anthony Volpe made a good play on, tried to get a force out at third, but Kike Hernandez was running hard. It's going to be a bang play. Volpe made a bad throw. Jazz Chisholm couldn't dig it out. Yankees had to stare down, bases loaded, nobody out. Garrett Cole, though, still on the mound, still dealing. Got a couple of strikeouts, got really close. Mookie Betts hits a slow roller to first that Anthony Rizzo played back, didn't really charge it. Garrett Cole, for some reason, didn't cover first. Betts beats it out for a very cheap infield single. You should have called it an error on somebody. Obviously, you can't. Ultimately, he just beats Rizzo to first. There was no play even. And that extended the inning. Freddie Freeman, who was the World Series MVP, got a big hit. Teoscar Hernandez got a double. It was a new ball game, 5-5. And in the late innings, the Dodgers just wore on the Yankees and ultimately got the job done. A couple sac flies late ends up being the difference. Blake Trinet was ridiculous. We saw it, right? When Trinet came out against the Mets in Game 6, it was over. There was just no chance that the Mets were going to hit Trinet. And the Yankees threatened a little bit. Aaron Judge got a double off of him when what was his, not really his third full inning of work, but he got the final out of the sixth, 1, 2, 3, seventh. He was out there trying to get 7 outs to get through that eighth inning. And Judge got him for a double. He pitched around Jazz Chisholm and walked him to put 2 runners on with 1 out. And he just got the job done. He was able to get Giancarlo Stanton to fly out on one of those turbo sinkers. And then he made Anthony Rizzo look silly with the strikeout. And 42 pitches for Blake Trinan gets the Dodgers through that eighth inning. Then Walker Buehler, who we talked about as being a potential free agent target for the Mets. I don't see him in a jersey not outside of Dodger blue next year. I think he's going to go back after what he just did in the World Series. Unbelievable start to win Game 3 and then gets the final 3 outs of the World Series in the 9th inning. And that Dodgers team, man, they were the best in baseball. I think there's some years where you watch an epic World Series play out, like when the Nationals beat the Astros, where it could have gone either way. You know, and the Nationals just got the breaks that they needed in a 7-game series to win it. And along the way, for a lot of champions, there might be a series or two where there is that doubt, right, of who the best team was, and just luck was on that team's side that wins it. I don't feel that with the Dodgers. They had 2 shutouts to beat the Padres, and then they were better than the Mets, and they were clearly better than the Yankees, and they deserve to be champions. So now we move to the offseason. It's officially here. Pete Alonso is a free agent, as is all those other Mets: Sean Manaea, Luis Severino, Harrison Bader, JD Martinez, Jose Iglesias, Jesse Winker, all the guys we've been talking about. And they hit the market. Free agency begins immediately, although there is a 5-day period where it is exclusive negotiations with your current team. So what I want to do in the next segment is I want to talk about the key dates to monitor here with the offseason upon us. What should you be looking out for? What are the different dates the Mets have to look at when it comes to the decisions they have to make as they try to build their roster for 2025? We're going to go through all of that in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. And Game Time has Game Time picks that'll make it easier for you to get tickets for your favorite live events, because they're going to filter out the fluff and show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. Sometimes you open the app, you see the tickets around the entire arena or the stadium. It's a little bit daunting. Where am I going to find the deals? You click that Game Time picks feature. It's going to filter them out. You just see the best possible deals available. What I love about Game Time, it's the place to go for last-minute tickets. You know, I'm going to go to a Miami Heat game next week. I'm not going to buy my tickets until I'm walking into the arena. And then when I'm right there, I'll pull up the app. I'll see what's available. I'll find the best possible deal. You can buy tickets in a matter of seconds, 2 taps. You're all set. Tickets delivered right to your phone. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONMLB. You're going to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Our goal is to get to 11,000 subscribers. Appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. All right, let's talk about key dates of the off season. What do we have to look forward to? October 31st, which is today. Happy Halloween to all of you. Players hit free agency, but there is a 5-day negotiation window where they can talk to their current teams about figures and maybe strike a deal. It rarely happens, but it did happen, most notably for the Mets a couple of years ago. Edwin Diaz signed that contract with the Mets before he hit the real open market where he would negotiate with all 30 teams. He wanted to be a Met. He was coming off that incredible 2022 season. They wanted to have him. They got the job done. They got a deal done on a contract that was more than $100 million, and he was a Met. So you could see something like that happen theoretically with Pete Alonso, right? Hey, Pete Alonso loves the Mets love Pete Alonso. Just get a deal done. Maybe that helps you when you're talking to Juan Soto if you have Pete already on the books. But we also know that is just not realistic. Scott Boras is going to take Pete Alonso to free agency where they can negotiate with all 30 teams, get the best possible offer. So I don't expect anybody to sign in that 5-day window. I just cannot see it. Honestly, actually, the more I think about it, Sean Manaea would make a little more sense than Pete Alonso just because the starting pitching market is pretty crowded. With that said, who is Sean Manaea's agent? It's also Scott Boras. So, yeah, this isn't going to be a window where over the next week we're going to see somebody sign. Instead, the bigger thing to pay attention to is the options. Around the league, all these different players have 5 days to decide their player option. Teams decide their club options. I'm actually going to have an article that's going to go up for Just Baseball. It's been kind of a beast to write where I have every single option listed, and we're going to, basically go through them all in that article. So I might be up late tonight cranking that thing out. But bottom line, from the Mets perspective, there's 2 players that have options that have to be settled. Manaea, a no-brainer opt-out. He's set to make $13.5 million next year with the Mets. He's going to make at least that, probably way more than that per year, is going to get maybe 3, maybe 4. Who knows? Off chance he gets 5 years, he's going to test the open market off of a career year. Phil Maton is really the one option that we have to wonder about for the next 5 days. He's got a $7.75 million club option with a $250,000 buyout. So the question for the Mets is, do you want Phil Maton back? Do you want to spend essentially $7.5 million to keep him, or do you want to just cut your losses, buy out the contract? You could still revisit signing him, but let him hit the market and sort of wait and see if he comes back to you at a lower number, or maybe you want to sign other relievers. My early read is that the Mets might just let him walk, not in bad terms or anything like that, but pay him the $250,000. Say, hey, we'll still talk to you in free agency. But you never know. I mean, you could just lock the guy up, lock him in at that number. It's not an outrageous number. I just think that with some of the other free agent relievers that signed last year at less than $7 million, you might be able to get 2 guys of Phil Maton's caliber for about $8 million, like $4 million a piece. And so I don't know if they necessarily want to lock that number in right now. You never know, though. Now, when you get to November 4th, this is when that 5-day window is going to end. So the options have to be settled. That is where your exclusive negotiation period ends. It's also where you have to make a decision on qualifying offers. The qualifying offer this year is set at $21.05 million. The Mets have 3 players who could get qualifying offers based on the seasons they just had. Pete Alonso obviously will get one. Sean Manaea, I think, is also a no-brainer to get one. And I imagine they extend one to Luis Severino. Severino is likely going to look for a multi-year deal coming off a season where he just threw 180 innings, first healthy season he has had in years. You get draft pick compensation if these guys decline the qualifying offer and sign elsewhere. And worst case scenario, if any of them come back on a 1-year deal at that number, it's still a good deal. Severino might not hit over $20 million per on his next deal, but a 1-year deal for a pitcher is never really a bad thing. So if they extend it to Sevy and he decides, you know what, I'm just going to take that money, I want to be back with the Mets, pitch on a 1-year deal again, by all means, that's a good outcome for the Mets. I think all three will decline it, and that's why you extend it to all of them, because you then get eventually draft pick compensation when they sign with their new teams, and that is based on how much money they sign for. We will talk about that at a later date when those decisions are made and all that good stuff. What else do we got here? Free agency officially begins when it comes to negotiating with all players on November 4th at 5 p.m. GM meetings also start that day. They go from the 4th through the 7th. So we'll see David Stearns get in front of some New York media during that event. Usually it might just be Andy Martino. So we'll get some questions answered from Stearns then. It's a time where GMs start to talk, kick around some ideas. You don't typically see any transactions done during the GM meetings, but the stage is set maybe for conversations that will continue throughout the offseason and might come to a head during the winter meetings. November 11th, awards finalists are announced for Rookie of the Year, Manager of the Year, Cy Young, and MVP. Carlos Mendoza, I imagine, might be a finalist for Manager of the Year. I think Pat Murphy likely wins it, but you never know. If the voting had happened at the end of October instead of at the end of the regular season, I think Mendoza would have run away with the NL Manager of the Year. Because that voting is on a regular season award, I bet he probably finishes runner-up or maybe somewhere in the top 3. Francisco Lindor is not going to win the MVP, but he should be a finalist for sure. He also should win a Silver Slugger, which will be announced on November 12th. I think he's probably the only Met that really has any chance of winning some hardware this year. And if he doesn't, we will riot. November 18th, Hall of Fame ballot is released. The 18th through the 21st is awards week. So that's where they will announce Rookie of the Year, Manager of the Year, Cy Young, and MVP in consecutive days. November 19th is when the qualifying offers are due. Players have to make their decisions on that. So maybe Severino takes the full 2 weeks to decline it. These guys sometimes will decline it right away. Like Pete Alonso, it's, hey, here's the offer. No, thank you. I'm going to be a free agent. Manaea, probably same thing. Severino, you never know. I remember with Noah Syndergaard, it was sort of a drawn-out process, right, where the Mets extended the qualifying offer. We all thought he was going to take it. Why would he not? He was coming off Tommy John. He met with Arnie Moreno and the Angels, and all of a sudden, he was signing for a similar figure to go play for the Angels instead of the Mets. So things can happen. You never know. That will be an important date to note when those 3 guys, assuming they all get the qualifying offer, officially decline it, hit the market, and that could tamper their market or dampen their market a little bit, right? Where, maybe Severino hits the market and a team has to think about giving up not only years to a guy who has a little bit of an uncertain past with the injuries and even the performance, and now they're thinking about giving up a draft pick as well. All of a sudden, maybe a Sevy can fall back to the Mets at a better number because that draft pick compensation is attached to him. For a guy like Pete Alonso, it's probably not going to matter. Like if you want Pete Alonso to be your starting first baseman, you're not going to care about giving up a draft pick. Let's see what else we got here. November 19th is also the deadline to add players to the 40-man roster. We'll talk about that at a later date, which prospects are, Rule 5 eligible. Again, we'll spend more time on it, but essentially once a player's in your organization for a certain amount of years, they become Rule 5 draft eligible, which takes place during the winter meetings, where another franchise could poach one of your prospects if they want to draft them and put them on the major league roster for the entirety of the season. Otherwise, they're returned to you. So that's another date to note. The owners' meetings are the 19th to the 21st of November. Probably not a significant thing there as far as transactions, right? That's more about league, status quo, them trying to figure out league business between the owners. Won't really matter too much for the players on the field. November 22nd is the non-tender deadline. Again, something we will talk about at a later date. You have a guy like Joey Lucchesi who's on your 40-man roster. You could technically keep him, but maybe you want to non-tender him to open up a spot on your roster. Let's say you needed to protect, I don't really know exactly where we're at years-wise. Maybe you needed to protect, trying to think of a prospect that might be close there, like a Mike Vassell or a Dom Hamill. I'm not sure how many years they have in the Met system, but if those guys become Rule 5 draft eligible and you think you might lose them, maybe you are replacing Joey Lucchesi on the roster, non-tendering him, and putting one of those guys on. So again, these are topics that we'll spend full shows on throughout the offseason as those dates approach. December 8th through the 11th is the winter meetings in Dallas. You'll see a lot of transactions take place there. This is the height of free agency. It's also where some big trades can happen. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And a little over a month from now. And then the last date to mention, opening day, March 27th, 147 days away from opening day. Baseball can't come back soon enough, but there's going to be so much that we get to discuss throughout this offseason as it relates to how the Mets try to build off of this great season and put together a championship roster for 2025. And that's what I want to talk about to close out the show. What are the biggest questions facing the Mets as they hit free agency? We'll talk about it in just a minute. First, though, another word from our sponsors. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks in the Mets. So if there's a big trade or a signing, I will let the insiders know first via text, so you don't have to go on social media to get your information. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways, and you can ask me questions anytime. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description, restsubtext.com/LockedOnMets. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the big questions facing the Mets this offseason. We've broached some of them since the Mets season ended, but free agency is here. The offseason has officially begun. So what are we looking out for? And I think the first looming question, it's obviously Pete Alonso's free agency, and then the big fish that's out there, Juan Soto. As soon as the World Series ended, you knew there was going to be questions. What's your future, Juan? Where are you going to go? Somebody even was bold enough to ask, do you believe the Mets are going to be a suitor for you in free agency? Which he sort of smiled and didn't really answer. He just said, look, I'm going to be open to all 30 teams. When even asked about the fans and them asking him to stay as he was leaving the field, pleading him to stay, he said, I hope, or this, how is that going to impact you? And he said, how is that going to impact ownership? And he talked about whoever wants me the most shows that they want me the most. This guy's going to go to the highest bidder. And I might spend the entire show tomorrow talking about Juan Soto again, because it is such a big looming question facing the New York Mets this offseason, because this is the guy to go get. And this is where Steve Cohen's money should finally land that big fish. They've done it in free agency when it came to aging aces. They got Max Scherzer. They got Justin Verlander. They won the bidding for a free agent like Starling Marte. But have they landed that top of the market free agent, the best guy, the free agent of the offseason since Steve Cohen took over? They have not. They tried to last year on the pitching front with Yoshinobu Yamamoto, a 25-year-old potential ace. Couldn't get the job done. Now you have a freshly turned 26-year-old that could be your franchise player that can go down as the greatest player in franchise history. If he signs with the New York Mets and he plays to the back of the baseball card, you are going to get at least 7, if not 8 years of amazing Juan Soto. Look at what Bryce Harper has done with the Phillies. This is the guy to get. So we're going to talk about that on a full show tomorrow, Juan Soto or bust. But that is obviously the biggest question facing the Mets. Are they going to land Juan Soto? If they do, has that impact Pete Alonso's free agency? Would they sign both? Is it one or the other? Again, that's something we'll talk about more tomorrow. Another big question for the Mets is pitching. The Mets need to add a lot of arms. They're going to lose, they're going to have Luis Severino, Manaea, and Jose Quintana hit free agency. Some of their relievers are going. Phil Maton potentially, if they don't exercise the club option. Ryan Stanek going to go out the door as well. Those were the two guys you were trusting the most in the playoffs. You still have Edwin Diaz. You have Reed Garrett. You got Daniel Nunez. You got some options. Sean Reed Foley might be back. There's some arms to start to build a bullpen around, but really, they got to kind of start from scratch on both fronts. There's a couple incumbents, but when you are overhauling half of your rotation and half of your bullpen, you need to add a ton of pitching. The Mets might make some trades to do that. They're going to have to sign a lot of guys. Are they going to be at the absolute top of the market? Are they in the Corbin Burns sweepstakes? Are they looking at Max Fried or Blake Snell, some top lefties? Sean Manaea, are they going to just return their lefty ace? What are the targets for the Mets in free agency when it comes to starting pitchers? Something I was planning to talk about today until the Dodgers handled business and finished the World Series, but we will get to it very soon. We're going to talk about the trade options and the free agent options, really exploring the market at some point over the coming week here. because that is, I think, the biggest need, even though Soto and Alonso are going to be the probably highest paid expenditures the Mets could add, unless they get a Corbin Burns. And they're bigger names to think about. The bigger mission, I think, for the Mets is to fix their pitching, because they're going to return a lineup that's going to have Francisco Lindor, it's going to have Mark Vientos, Brandon Nimmo, Francisco Alvarez, Starling Marte. There's going to be options there. Tyrone Taylor, a lot of prospects coming. They should still land a bat or two, but they have to land a handful of arms for their rotation and their bullpen. So that's going to be a huge, huge question for David Stearns and his front office to answer. And the last one I have is just the complementary pieces for their lineup. Are you going to bring back Jesse Winker, JD Martinez, Jose Iglesias, Harrison Bader? I think the most likely to return is probably Iglesias for the vibes and the leadership. I think Jesse Winker has a decent chance to return. I imagine Bader and Martinez are going to go. We talked about that on a full episode after the Mets lost in the NLCS. You can go back and check that out for a little more analysis there. But I think those are questions. And if it's not bringing your own guys back, who are going to grab some of those final roles on your team? And how does that relate to your top prospects and your young players? Is Brett Baty getting a full shot next year? Is he in a competition with Ronnie Mauricio to make the roster, with Luis Angel Acuna? Are you going into spring with three guys vying for one spot potentially? Jet Williams and Drew Gilbert are in the Arizona Fall League right now. What's their outlook? Are they going to be pieces for you next year? Do you envision Brandon Sproat takes a big role in your rotation? There is a lot of youth that is on the horizon, but it's still youth. You can't bank on that alone. So they are going to have to sign some other pieces beyond just the top of the market, whether it is Soto, Alonso, Burns. They're going to have to really fill this roster out. So that's always going to be a fun subplot throughout the offseason, is looking within the margins and finding the other pieces that are out there that you sign, like they did last year with Harrison Bader and JD Martinez and Jose Iglesias on a minor league deal. All of those pieces proved to be vital to the Mets. And if David Stearns has taught us anything since he's taken over this team, he will be active on all fronts. So even a minor league signing, we probably didn't spend much time talking about Jose Iglesias signing a minor league deal whenever he did, but it turned out to be a big thing. So those are all the different factors that will play into building out a roster that has to survive another marathon. The Mets did an incredible job this year putting together a team that we will never forget as Mets fans. It was an awesome season. They ran up against the champion, couldn't beat them. No shame in that. They took them to 6 games, one of 2 teams in the playoffs to beat them twice, the Padres and the Mets. You can make your arguments about which of those 2 teams was better this year, but I would say the best 3 teams in baseball proved to be the Dodgers, the Padres, and the Mets. We're going to have a fun power rankings at justbaseball.com coming out soon, where we're going to do a postseason, literally not postseason, but post the season, post World Series power rankings of who are the best 10 teams in baseball this year. And the Mets are right up there. They had a great season, but everybody starts over. And the team that you're chasing, the team that won it all, is going to return Shohei Ohtani, Mookie Betts, and Freddie Freeman. They're going to have Yoshinobu Yamamoto. They're going to have Tyler Glass now. Shohei Ohtani's going to pitch next year. They're going to have a lot of talent. It's going to be a very tough team that is up on that mountaintop that's going to look to win back-to-back World Series titles for the first time since, I believe, the Yankees in the late 90s, if I'm not mistaken. So it hasn't been done in a long time. Typically, those teams don't come back and win it all. But when you have a team as talented as the Dodgers, that is the standard everyone is chasing. It's a very, very high standard. So the Mets have their work cut out for them to just get to the starting point of the season, and then a whole new marathon begins. But that is why we love this game. And that's why with Locked On Mets, coverage never stops. Just because the season is officially over, I'm still going strong 5 days a week, all off season long. And when a major transaction happens on the weekend, you know I will give you my breaking live reaction as soon as it happens. I'll be coming on YouTube to talk about it and doing follow-up shows to talk about the impact that those additions might have on the roster moving forward. So if you don't want to miss out on any of that content, make sure if you're watching on YouTube, you hit that subscribe button. If you are listening on the podcast side of things, please follow, and also do me a favor, rate the show, leave a review. That really helps. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every single day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports. We're talking about Locked On Sports today with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube.